At 400,000, he'll bid me 410.
This is where Aucklanders' housing dreams crash into reality. We can't show the buyers' faces, but the real estate agents there told the story.
400,000 back of the room. 600, like that better. 600,000 bid now.
The people here were largely Asian, and they had money to spend. It's highly likely that many of the buyers are looking for investment properties. Many may well not be resident in New Zealand.
800, good bid. 800,000.
Here's the other side of the Auckland housing story. Hopeful young buyers looking at new properties to raise families and wondering how they can afford them.
I think a lot of first home buyers want to buy a house which is near new and is presented perfectly in a suburb which is fantastic, but I think that's somewhat unrealistic.
To get a basic 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom house, you're looking around 400,000 these days, and that's an 80 grand deposit, and it's just absolutely, it's crazy.
Overseas investors basically should be supporting the country by building new homes and not buying existing house builds.
Or they had to go and live in somewhere like Hamilton or a smaller town for a year and then move in.
For young people, the Kiwi quarter-acre Pavlova paradise looks a long way off. Good evening, I'm Sean Plunket. Tonight we're going to focus on what has become one of the biggest issues this election, the high price of housing. Both National and Labour are making big promises to finance and build thousands of new homes. So tonight we have Housing Minister Nick Smith and opposite him, Labour's housing spokesman Phil Twyford, plus two experts, Oliver Hartwich from the New Zealand Initiative and from the Morgan Foundation, as in Gareth Morgan, we have economist Geoff Simmons. I want to start with you two politicians. The Herald said this week, the problem is not primarily one of supply. People are housed. The problem is that so many are trapped in rented houses because it has become so much harder to buy one. Is this an affordability crisis rather than a supply crisis, Nick?
Oh, it's certainly a challenge, but let's look at the reliable data.
Well, my question was, is it an affordability crisis or a supply
let's deal
crisis?
firstly with the issue of the crisis language, is that when National came to government, affordability measured by Roost, by Demographia and by the independent Massey University was 30% worse than it is today. That was because house prices doubled under the previous government and because interest rates roughly doubled. Now, in terms of is it just supply?
There's no crisis.
I'm saying it's a challenge. I'm saying it's always been hard for young people to get into their houses. We need to increase supply. Now, your second point was, is it just an issue of supply? Yes, we think that's mainly it. But there is also some demand issues. For instance, in the 2009 budget, we increased the tax on those that invest and rent properties by more than any budget in a generation by removing depreciation on housing, and that increased their tax bill by $1 billion a year.
Doesn't
and
appear
that
to have made much difference.
Well, yes, it has. And let me give you an example. We have doubled the rate of house build. When we came to government, we're building 1,000 houses a month. Figures out today, building 2,200 in the last month.
But Auckland house prices are up 33% since 2011.
Yeah, that's not as bad as 28% in 1 year or 97% over the previous government.
OK, so you're suggesting challenge, not crisis.
In Sydney, have a capital gains tax, have those other things. House prices are going faster up than in Auckland. Productivity Commission says big issues, land supply. That's why in the last 9 months, we have zoned more land residential than in the previous 9 years of the last government.
OK. Phil Twyford, is it a supply crisis or an affordability crisis?
So I think Nick Smith's probably the only person in New Zealand today who thinks there isn't a crisis. That's the first thing. In Auckland, average house prices have gone up by $75,000 in the last year. It takes 50 years now to pay off the average mortgage in Auckland. And in Christchurch, you've got people paying $400 or $500 to live in a sleep-out or a caravan. We have a housing crisis. At the root of the problem is supply. We simply don't have enough houses. That's driving prices up.
If that were true, Phil Twyford, there would be thousands of people wandering homeless in the streets of Auckland, and there are not.
No, not at all. It slows down the rate of household formation, so people don't leave home as early as they would. We do have a shortage that's driving up house prices, but the other big thing that's responsible for pushing house prices sky high is rampant property speculation. And Auckland is a speculator's paradise, And Nick's government, the national government, refuses to even consider a capital gains tax that almost every other mainstream economist in New Zealand thinks would take the steam out of the housing market.
That, I assure you. Oliver Hartwich, what is the problem here? Is it a crisis or a challenge?
I think we can talk about language for a long time, whether it is a crisis or a challenge, but I think it's actually a challenging crisis. And we've got a supply problem. We certainly have a supply problem because in the last few years we haven't built enough houses, and we have had construction rates that were the lowest since the 1930s. So we can talk about language, but I think the simple reality is that we should build more homes.
That's right.
OK. Geoff?
We have a housing bubble, certainly, and that is because housing is the only investment that isn't taxed. And we've got plenty of houses. You know, half the Coromandel sits empty the whole time. At the same time, you know, Central Auckland's a retirement village. You know, my parents are retired and living in Grey Lynn. They've got no incentive to move. We should be pushing those baby boomers, giving them an incentive to free up that land in the centre, which is where the young, productive people should be living.
All right. I want to come back to you, Nick Smith. You, earlier this year, restricted the amount of money that people could borrow through the LVR scheme.
No, the Reserve Bank did independently.
Well, independently.
You signed it off, Nick. Your government gave the Reserve Bank the powers to do that.
We have
and you signed it off.
And let's be clear why. Let's be clear why.
You've now introduced a policy, Nick Smith, which makes it easier for people to borrow money because you're giving or making more available to them.
Yeah, but let me explain exactly why. The responsibility of the Reserve Bank is financial stability, and that's incredibly important. We can see in countries like North America and in Europe the damage that you get from dangerous house price bubbles. Now, what we have done is we've said we're going to provide a government guarantee for people with small deposits, with a 10% deposit, through the Welcome Home Loan Scheme. Now, that comforts the Reserve Bank because there isn't a risk of those people defaulting on their mortgage, so manages their issues of financial stability, while at the same time we're getting young families into houses early, and that's a good thing.
I want to go to our experts now. What is that going to do to the price, the affordability of homes?
Well, I think we have seen what happens if you try similar measures in other markets. You have seen it in Britain, you have seen it in Australia. When you introduce first-time buyer loans or first-time buyer subsidies, you of course have a price effect long-term.
But you're wrong in one respect. You'd be correct if the government was providing those extra home start grants for existing houses, because you have more money charging after them. But only a moment ago, Oliver, you were saying the key issue is building more houses. And that is why the package of Home Start only increases the grant to $20,000 for more houses. Because you know what the problem is, Sean? We're getting lots of new houses built, but they're 700 and 800 grand. And right. So what we wanted to do with the Home Start package is provide a real incentive for more houses, but for more houses in the affordable range.
But you cannot guarantee that there won't be windfall gains for people who would have built houses anyway and just get a subsidy on top of that.
Phil Twyford, where are you on this?
Look, it's simply not credible, Nick, for you to suggest that this program is going to stimulate the building of a whole lot of new houses.
I bet it will.
No, if you divide the $18 million by the 40,000 extra people you think are going to benefit from this, that works out at about $2,500 per person. Yes, it is. Now, that is not going to be enough to stimulate new housing. And also, even if people get the maximum extra grant of $10,000, that's not going to... in Auckland, house prices have gone up $75,000 in the last year.
Well, let's
it's
deal
not
with those
going to
numbers.
make a blind bit of difference, but what it will do is stoke demand, and that's why every commentator has criticised the policy this week and said it will make matters worse.
Geoff, do you want to chip in on that?
I just think it's crazy to be throwing money at middle-class people. They're not the ones that need government subsidies.
That's why there's an income limit.
But what you're doing is giving them money to get indebted up to the eyeballs. I mean, the example that National gave in their press release would the couple of the example that you gave would have repayments that are what would be considered unaffordable by the government's definition of affordable housing. You know, that at interest rates of 6 or 7%, they would be paying almost a half of their income in repayments each year.
Let me tell you the part that I disagree, and I understand the pure economist's point of view. We as a government believe that there are real social benefits in having people own their own home. They participate more in local body elections, you make for stronger communities, they've got a greater stake in their community. And so, look, this is, Sean, this is the biggest package. It's actually double the numbers. It's $450 million. Let me finish, please, Sean. It is the biggest package of support for first-home buyers since people used to be able to get the state advances loans in the 1970s.
Nick, I'm not arguing over its size. We're discussing whether or not it is effective. This seems to have come down to the point Are people or are houses in New Zealand there for people to invest in, or are they there for people to live in?
For both.
This is the problem we've got, Sean.
Yep.
The problem we've got is that property speculation is rampant. The reason that rents have been more or less stable in Auckland over the last decade is that we have almost too many rental properties, and there are very few owner-occupied properties. Home ownership rates are dropping. That's the problem. Everyone's buying and selling houses purely for capital gain. We've got people on the other side of the world outbidding Kiwi first home buyers with cheap credit. This is not good for young New Zealanders.
I want to give Oliver Hartwich a crack here.
Well, there's something you could do if you're concerned about that. If you're concerned about property speculation, you would actually free up supply, because once you take the expectation of future capital gains out of the market,
exactly right.
people will stop it.
I agree entirely, Oliver, and that's why Labor will publish a national policy statement under the RMA that will direct councils to actually increase the build rate, increase the supply of greenfields land,
Why did you vote against
and liberalise the restrictive planning
Phil,
rules.
why did you vote against the very legislation that has enabled us to free up that supply? We've zoned more land residential in Auckland in the last 9 months with those 63 special housing areas. Going to do another batch next week.
We voted against it because it's ineffective and it's not delivering any affordable houses.
Okay, Phil Twyford, you've also said you'll introduce a capital gains tax. Geoff, what's your opinion as to what effect that tax will have on the speculation, on the investment homeowner?
Well, the capital gains tax, modelling suggests it will knock house prices a bit and it will reduce a bit of speculation, but it's a very weak-kneed version of what's needed, If we were to tax housing on a similar basis that we tax all other investments, then that would really knock the wind out of the speculation. So, it goes some way, but the capital gains tax, very complicated, and because of all of the exemptions, is only going to make a minor difference.
It's an envy tax, Sean. Let me tell you why it won't work.
It's a fairness tax. Why shouldn't people who buy and sell houses to make money, why shouldn't those people, Nick, pay tax like everybody else does on their wages and salaries?
We'll get to your question. Okay, the question.
The Cullen tax review said no, a capital gains tax will make no difference. Independent. The English tax review, exactly the same thing, asked us to tackle the issue of depreciation, which we did. Productivity Commission, very substantive report, a lot of economic analysis, only 2 years ago, said a capital gains tax will make no difference. They've got one in Aussie. House prices are going up even faster there than what they are here. It is a nonsense.
I might also add the IMF said that a capital gains tax might work.
Very important if, both the OECD and the IMF said a capital gains tax is only effective, it applies to the full market. Now, of course, Labor's saying they're going to exempt the 70% of houses, and that will make it completely ineffective.
Okay, Oliver, you want to speak to this?
Well, I think we have to realise that taxes don't build houses. We have to get back to the root cause of the problem, and that is supply. And again, we have to ask the question, why is it that we're not building enough? And I think one of the things that's holding us back is a lack of infrastructure provision. We make it really hard for councils to provide the infrastructure for the extra development that they have to generate. And that's why you have to instruct Auckland Council to build, because otherwise they would never do it out of their own accord. Unfortunately, I think we have to really start at the root causes of the crisis. That's a lack of infrastructure finance for councils, and then we can free up these councils to build more and build the houses that the country really needs.
And hang on, Geoff.
People don't want to live in the Bombay Hills. This is where you're building. It's our best agricultural land, and when you add in the costs of transport, sure, the housing is cheaper, but when you add in the costs of transport, it's actually less affordable than living central. People want to live in central Auckland. That's where the house prices are growing fastest, and we need incentives to free up that land in central Auckland. And I take your point, Nick, about the capital gains tax, but those reviews did also talk about land taxes and the comprehensive capital tax. Those methods would not only knock speculation on the head, but would provide an incentive to free up that very, very economic, high-value central land for further development.
Which we support.
Well, Sean, one of the big opportunities of our Kiwi Build program is that it's going to open the door for much more intensive urban development in the city, as Geoff says, around railway stations, where you can revitalise town centres, build affordable housing, and you don't have to do it out on the fringes where people have to drive an hour to get to work.
I have to ask you, at present, the private sector seems to be able to build the sort of affordable housing that you're promising without any assistance from the government.
Where's that happening?
Where's that G.J. Gardner down in Takanini. You can buy the sort of house you're talking about for a comparable price.
Not quite. And if you look at the market, there are very few houses that are being built. Only 5% of the houses that are being built at the moment by the market are in the affordable range. That's precisely why Labor wants to work with the market through KiwiBuild.
OK, we've talked about long-term solutions, we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about tax, and you saw the clip. What about the foreigners? What about the houses that are owned by people who do not live here? And whether or not we have statistics, the anecdotal evidence that those people are outbidding New Zealanders and making them tenants literally in their own land.
His government refuses to even collect the data. They don't want to know what the facts are.
Let me come to this. Every time in my political career, the country's got a tricky problem. I don't care whether it's unemployment, whether it's issues of crime and now housing, the cheapest, lowest political trick in the book is to say it's all those damn foreigners and immigrants that's the problem.
That is intellectually dishonest for you to say that.
Let's look at the data.
There is no data.
No, yes, there is.
You refuse to collect the data.
No, that's not correct. Let me take you through that.
You don't want to know what the data says. That's why.
IRD records the number of people who are overseas resident who are renting and receiving a rental income. It's been 2.5%. It's been constant for the last 5 years. But, of course, of that 2.5...
Did you see the pictures at the top of the program?
Oh, yeah, but look, I tell you, 40% of the population of Auckland is now of Asian descent.
I'll quote to you.
I'll
quote to you from the Landlord's blog site. 80% of home buyers in North Shore Auckland are bussed off planes direct from China. About 50 prospects are taken on whirlwind bus tours to buy virtually unseen 50 houses at a time.
Nick, you're in denial.
No, I'm not. And I would simply say, Phil, you are playing the lowest card in the book, and that is to blame foreigners and immigrants for a problem that's fundamentally
It's the responsibility of the New Zealand government to look after New Zealanders, not speculators on the other side of the world.
Our
problem is to look at the facts, not the rhetoric.
You should look after New Zealanders.
Geoff?
Well, the main issue is that we're hassling foreigners for investing in housing. And they're doing it for the same reason we don't, because it's not taxed.
That's right.
It's the only asset in New Zealand. It's the only investment in New Zealand that is not taxed. So of course foreigners are going to want to invest in it, as we have for decades.
Should they be stopped from doing so? Would it make a difference to the affordability of housing?
Well, certainly if you reduce the demand for speculation, then it will...
Look, real estate companies are marketing New Zealand houses in China because there's no capital gains tax.
Oliver Hartwich, do you think it would make a difference if we restricted foreign ability to buy here?
I think the foreigners issue is a sideshow. It is a complete sideshow. We had to look at some data that's available. I wish there would be more data available publicly, but I think it is a complete sideshow. There are other factors that are far more important that we're neglecting. For example, we've got an ageing population, and that will need different housing in the future.
All right, we are out of time. I would like to thank all four of you for what has been a very interesting debate. The politicians will stick around with us to talk about the campaign. After the break, we're going to hear what's gone wrong and what's gone right on the campaign trail this week. Welcome back. Well, it's been a wacky week on the campaign trail, just like all the ones before it. We had the first, of course, big face-off between David Cunliffe and John Key this week. I'm wondering, Nick Smith, how do you think your guy went?
Oh, I think he was in good shape, and certainly in terms of getting that very clear, important message for National Way, and that it's all about the economy, that New Zealand's doing well, that we need to keep New Zealand on the right track. And the second message I think he was pretty effective in getting away is that any alternative government is going to be such a potpourri of different parties that it's going to disrupt stability, and that would be an awful course.
Okay. Do you think he can do better, though?
He always can do better, but look, he's a pretty good act, and I think the results of the voter survey afterwards show pretty convincingly he won.
I get a quietly confident feeling from Labor people I've spoken to today about last night.
Yeah, I think we certainly feel, and I think most of the commentators today feel that it was definitely a victory on points for David Cunliffe. He stepped up when he had to. He was confident, he was strong, he had all his messages down, and he put forward, I think, a different vision for New Zealand and really posed the question about whether or not people are getting their fair share.
Do you think he was
recovery.
good enough to convince perhaps some of his doubters in caucus that he was the right choice?
Oh, those doubts were banished a long time ago, Sean.
Really?
And,
when?
David has stepped up. He's campaigning well, and I think he's going to make a great Prime Minister.
Oh, and of course, we also had the hand grenade from Winston Peters about Judith Collins just before that debate started. Nick Smith, have you heard any rumblings that Judith has been
I've been in the National Caucus room for 24 years. I've never worked with a leader who has the confidence of the team in the way that John Key does. And the second thing is I've also been in Parliament for a long time with Winston Peters. He's the master of mischievousness, and that's just what he's up to in the commentators.
Oh, Phil Twyford, do you share Nick Smith's view on that? This is just a classic little Winston tweet.
Oh, look, it's good to see the National Party in disarray. They've taken a little bit of a hit in the polls this week.
Not as bad as Labour's.
One of the other networks,
I'd rather be where we are than you are.
One of the other networks shows the gap, the balance between left and right on a knife edge, and I think these guys are panicking. And you saw it when the Prime Minister was looking sweaty and defensive and kind of peevish during the debate.
I'll go that far, Phil Twyford. Fair enough to say, though, that Judith Collins remains a liability for the National Party in this campaign, with questions about some of the issues raised by that book still in the public's mind.
Well, look, we've seen Nicky Hager books come out of the left a number of occasions. He's a real strong Green Party supporter.
Today you had Matthew Hooton, a right-wing commentator, saying she's not fit to hold a senior post.
Well, look, Judith has been a very competent minister. She's got some really good results in things that matter, like sort of those crime figures. Crime's not even an issue this election because of the hard yards of people like Judith Collins and Antolli, and people actually care a damn sight more than that, than the tittle-tattle of Nicky Hager.
Look, Judith is toast, and we saw not only the likes of Matthew Hooton and Michelle Bogue, who are usually, good mouthpieces of National Party thinking. We also saw Bill English distance himself in a way that was very, very striking.
Phil, Nick, we're out of time. I'm sure we're going to have a fun week on the campaign trail next week too. We will be back after the break with news about our competition. Welcome back. Next week, Finance Minister Bill English will be with us, plus David Parker, the man David Cunliffe says would be Finance Minister in a Labor government. This will be a big show, one of their only serious debates on TV. Now to our prize draw from last week. The winners of this book, Changing Times, are Marion Prisk, Brian Morton and Michelle Glamazina. All our competition winners will be hearing from us this week. And if you want to catch up with the show, go to primetv.co.nz, where you'll be able to see a stream of tonight's show. You can also access that from frontpage.co.nz, where you'll get a transcript of the show as well. So until next week and our debate on the economy, thanks for watching and a very good night.